The Batman is one of the most visually impressive comic book films of the last decade, maybe even of all time. Now, I know that is a huge claim to make, but it's one that I stand by, and in order to support that point today, I want to kind of break down for you guys the concept art for the film and just how well that translates to what we finally do see on screen, because in a lot of cases, it lines up really, really closely, almost too closely in some cases.
It looks very, similar. Okay.
And I think there is a really good reason why, and I will cover that later in the video. Now, I could yap about the Batman's production cycle and the concept art for quite literally hours, but I know your time is much more valuable than that. So I'll just be giving you guys a side-by-side of this concept art versus what we actually do get on screen, and pointing out some of the similarities, some of the differences, some of the unused concepts, unused shots, and things that I think would be really cool to maybe see in a sequel. Before we get into it, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't. I've got a lot of cool stuff coming up, working on a Batman fan film, some more cosplay stuff, lots and lots of cool things you don't want to miss. Let's get into it. So straight off the bat with the opening of the film, the only piece of concept art that we actually do get from the intro here is of the mayor's mansion. And I think one of the only main differences to note is that in the concept art, it actually looks like it's in a little bit more of a derelict neighborhood, as you can see with the kind of razor wire fence down the front there. But otherwise, this lines up basically exactly the same. Architecturally, the mayor's son here, of course, looking out down at the street below. Real quick add in here, I did manage to find one more piece of concept art from the start of the film. Originally, I thought we only had that exterior shot of the mayor's mansion, but this is an interior shot of the Riddler stalking out the mayor from the shadows about to attack him. It is nearly identical to the final film, the mayor lit by the TV, totally unaware the Riddler's just lurking in the shadows behind him. Interestingly, he's wearing a hood here, which suggests this was from an earlier design phase before they locked in that cold weather mask and the glasses look. Again, this moment lines up really, really closely to what we do end up seeing on screen. So the Campfire City Halloween opening montage has some of the most fleshed out concept art that we see across the entire production, so we're really spoiled here. Right away, you can see how closely the design of things like Gotham Square line up between the concept art and final film. In some of these visuals, of course, they've clearly fleshed out the city with more billboards, neon signage and that, but structurally, it's basically all there. Almost effectively a one-for-one, which you will see a lot of as we go through this video. There's this early piece as well, as Batman's silhouette was potentially going to be visible watching this guy come out of the store, but I think they play it better in the final film because we don't know that he's there, we just feel that he might be there. It really builds to the mystery or the final reveal for him at the train station. Now, not every shot is a perfect match, like some of these are just, I've lined these up as closely as I think what has inspired the final look in the film, like this rainy underpass with the corner store. It doesn't line up perfectly, but I think it's close enough that it feels like it's part of the same opening sequence here. Something that I did find quite interesting though about this montage or the opening kind of scenes footage or concept art is that Batman seemed to be much more present in this early art. So for example, riding atop the train, this is a really cool shot. In the final film, we don't see Batman at all here, except we do get that shot looking into the darkened train carriage. Again, it really highlights the fact that, it builds again, as I said before, to the idea that he comes out of the shadows, but he could be in any one of these shadows rather than just outright showing him. As cool as this shot would be with him riding on top of the train in a final version, I think the idea of building up to a reveal works much, much better. Now, some of these darker, more rundown environments as well, this is what I think is just, I've lined this up with Bruce kind of like going through the crowds and looking for crime early on. They feel like drifter moments where Bruce is kind of looking at these more derelict neighborhoods, trying to, scope out crime. This is just an alternate piece of the Drophead sprinting out across from the store and straight into, well, the dark alley or Batman, depending on how they initially were going to play it. Quick Easter egg here too, in the final movie, this grocer is called Good Times Grocer, which is a nod to Robert Pattinson's role in his film Good Time. And the Drophead here is actually wearing the same outfit that Robert Pattinson wore, which is a really, really nice detail. Now, none of that is in the concept art here, so this idea to create this Easter egg probably happened quite late in the production. This shot at the bank here with the guys vandalizing it, this is almost a perfect match. Again, looking from the POV of the bank through the glass with the kind of Molotov cocktail coming through, basically frame for frame. Love this. Now this next one, this is literally a 1-for-1. Like you could overlay this, and I will, like with the final shot in the film, you can barely see the difference. And this does happen more than once in this breakdown. And I will expand more on this later. I will get to this, but a lot of this concept art looks so close to the final version of the film that it almost feels like the concept art was made after they shot it. Now that would be ludicrous. There's no point doing concept art after you've shot the film. But the compositions and like the visual elements just line up so well that I have developed a bit of a theory on why that might be the case, because you really truly don't usually see this with concept art lining up so closely. Now lastly, I really like this shot of the bat signal, or this early version of the scene where Batman was at the bat signal. It's a really cool vibe having Batman there, but it makes much more sense to have Gordon there in the final shot, because you know, Batman standing at his own light calling himself doesn't often work. I mean, I feel like sometimes Batman might turn the light on to get Gordon's attention, but anyway, the point here is in the film it works much better having Gordon here, but another really close compositional matchup here. Now, in the final cut of the film, they definitely stack the odds much heavier against Batman than we see in this final concept art here. In the early visuals, he's squaring up with only 2, maybe 3 guys tops, but in the final film, it's what, 8, maybe 9? It could even be 10. I haven't actually counted how many people are here, but it's a lot. I think this just reinforces in the final film, of course, how much of a powerhouse this Batman is and how comfortable he is in a street fight where he is very clearly outnumbered. Now this piece of concept art isn't a direct 1-for-1, but it's clearly that entrance scene where he's walking out of the shadows. What is consistent across both the concept art and the film though is the rain. It looks like this sequence was always designed to take place in the pouring rain, which I think just adds this really like tactile kind of grunge element to it, and this is our first kind of proper introduction to the streets of Gotham. So I feel like if you're doing that, you want to really sell it with rain. This place is dreary, miserable, and depressing, and I think both the concept art and what we do get in the final film really does sell that. Interestingly though, there's a shot here that didn't make it into the final film that looks like they were experimenting with Batman maybe entering the scene a little bit differently. So having him standing atop this staircase here, and you can frame him from this low angle looking up, it does emphasize kind of the imposing nature and the power of the Batman. I think this would have looked really cool in film, but the idea of having him emerge from the shadows, I think, is a much stronger choice, and it plays into the whole Can't Fight City Halloween sequence that we've just seen of Batman possibly being in any one of these shadows and nobody knows where he is or where he could show up. So I think, yes, this final version that they went with works much better on screen. Now this image here, this final one for this sequence, it doesn't match up perfectly to anything in the film, but I thought this was close enough with him looking down at the guy he's just saved. And so as I go through, there'll be the odd shot or two that doesn't match up with anything, so I just try and link it up as closely as possible. But yeah, him standing in what looks like a kind of train station sort of underpass section in the rain, I figured this was close enough. So jumping into the something in the way montage here, this actually starts off with the press conference outside the mayor's mansion. I didn't actually originally clock this as taking place outside the mayor's mansion until I was looking at the concept art and realized that the bottom section of the building here matched up with that early piece of concept art. So yeah, same location, probably obvious to most of you guys, but that actually only just clicked for me. From there, we transition into these beautiful shots of Bruce traveling through Gotham as he's kind of going through in his head, which we later learn is his journal in that kind of monologue. Now, there's no direct 1-for-1 comparison with these motorcycle shots, but I figured showing him kind of driving through this empty Gotham underpass, like the mood kind of lined up with him going through Gotham Square early in the morning when it was kind of empty. What really does stand out for me though is how tightly Gotham's layout and architecture seem to have been locked in from the start. Like the shape of the island and the way it kind of curves around to the right there, the skyline, the footprint of the city, the design of the bridge, all of that seems to have been decided on pretty early. And like I know they built a lot of Gotham out in the volume, so in that 3D kind of space, because they did a lot of filming on the volume sets. So it makes sense that they would have a version of Gotham designed very early that would carry on or carry through so accurately through the concept art through to the final version that we do see in the film. And it gives Gotham arguably probably the most distinct or unique look that we've seen on screen, except outside of maybe Burton's interpretation, which was incredibly heavily stylized. So next we've got the moment of Bruce descending into that subway tunnel entrance. This is basically a perfect match, the composition, the angle, completely identical. It's always fun when I see these ones line up. And the tunnels that he is traveling through here, they look like some kind of abandoned subway or railway infrastructure. I've never quite figured out exactly what that is, but it's definitely kind of in the lead up to Wayne Terminus underneath Gotham or Wayne Tower there. Speaking of Wayne Tower, next shot here, looking up at Wayne Tower, this does show the Batmobile in this shot, and it probably truthfully could pair with the shot of Bruce driving up to the tower after the explosion where Riddler's kind of sent him that bomb. But I felt like compositionally here, this lined up closer with him driving into the tower on his drifter motorcycle. These just looked visually more similar, and I was happier lining these two up here. Okay, so this next shot here in the Batcave, this is a direct 1-for-1, minus the camera pan, of course, but it's pieces of concept art like this where I really start to question the production timeline, because as I keep saying, concept art just does not line up this closely with the final results in film. Now, storyboards, sure, they're meant to match, but this is full-blown concept art. So either these were done after filming, or they were just working to a ridiculously tight visual guide that was established really early on. Either way, it's really rare. Now, this next shot, I slotted into this something in the way section because it just kind of feels like it fits the kind of vibe of establishing the mood of Gotham. I actually think that is Batman there gliding in the middle there, so this technically could fit with his wingsuit escape sequence, but this just felt more kind of synonymous with the establishing of Gotham in that something in the way sequence. Now, finally, Bruce rolling into Wayne Terminus here, or the Batcave. This is a really strong visual matchup. Not much more to say. Framing, angle, composition, all of that's there. A nice matchup. So moving on to Wayne Tower. Now, Wayne Tower actually has a lot of exterior shots that we never do see in the film. Now, the only reason I know these are pieces of concept art for Wayne Tower is because of James Chinlin's website. Now, James Chinlin was the lead production designer on the Batman, and in a lot of these file names of these concept images, you'll see things like Wayne Tower exterior dot whatever. So without that, I would have just assumed these were random Gotham rooftops or cityscapes. The architecture is similar, so, you know, someone with a keener eye than me probably could have figured out that these were supposed to be Wayne Tower, but it's good to have that confirmation from James Chinlin's file names. So based on these, it looks like they were probably planning on doing a lot more exterior photography of Wayne Tower. And honestly, of all the unused pieces of concept art, these are the ones that I wish had made it into the film the most. A lot of these show Batman kind of standing on the ledges of Wayne Tower, overlooking Gotham, just like the amount of just presence radiating from this man, just straight aura farming. It's insane. These just look so good, and seeing these in live action, I think would have been just absolutely stunning, off the charts, beautiful. A lot of these shots do look like he's gearing up to leave the tower for a night of being Batman, and they maybe initially had the idea of him exiting from the roof. Kind of like the Arkham games as well, where like you can get into Wayne Tower and there's that big, you can do that big dive glide off the top of the Wayne Tower. But seeing as how Bruce doesn't have like proper flight or gliding tech yet, as we see in his kind of disastrous wingsuit landing, it probably makes more sense to save something like that for the sequel. So him exiting through the bottom of the tower, through Wayne Terminus and like the underground Batcave, it makes more sense, yeah, having him come out of there than kind of diving and gliding off the top. Now this piece here, again, I wouldn't have known was Wayne Tower without the file name, but this is actually like a ground level entrance of Wayne Tower. And the most interesting thing to me about this is it's completely derelict. It's boarded up, it's abandoned, it just has this really inhospitable vibe. And it really does match where Bruce is in this film right now, which is just he's letting the name of Wayne and his family kind of crumble and fall apart. It's like he doesn't care about it. He doesn't care about maintaining it, which really does fit with where Bruce is in the film. And then now inside the tower, these interiors are just freaking gorgeous. I'm obsessed with this architecture. Now, I don't even know what to properly call this. It's some kind of Gothic style architecture. You know, if there's any architecture nerds watching this video, please drop it down in the comments below. I'd love to know. But it's just so like, it's so like ornate and ornamental. It screams money, like old money, which of course the Waynes and the Wayne family is. But also it feels really neglected. It's quite dusty. It's very dimly lit. It looks kind of musty. Just, you know, like Bruce is kind of letting it rot around him. And again, really fits with where Bruce is character-wise in this film. And now we've got Bruce's parents' bedroom here, and the concept art and the final version we get on film here, this is basically identical, just the woodwork, the pillars, these big ornamental arches. It's just so beautifully realized on screen. And again, it really begs that same question. Did the set design come from the concept art, or was the concept art done after to match the final build? I know that's a question that I keep asking, and we're building towards an answer, don't worry. Either way, the level of detail here is insane, and I just really hope we get to see see more of Wayne Tower in the sequel. Maybe a bit of a revitalized and revived version of Wayne Tower, because, you know, Bruce has kind of come into a more hopeful era. But yeah, Wayne Tower, absolutely love this concept art. It's really, really beautiful. Now, a lot of the film takes place at the Iceberg Lounge, so rather than splitting it up every time we revisit it, I've grouped everything here into one section. So that includes the club itself, the 44 Below, Falcone's penthouse, Penguin, Selina, Batman, the whole thing. Starting off, this first piece of concept art looks like it's from the 44 Below, so where Selina is sent in by Batman wearing the contact lenses. The art feels like the space is a lot more lavish than what we see in the film, in the sense that it feels kind of more high society, more upscale. Whereas in the film, it's kind of has more of a grimier, seedier underground tone. But I think that does track with the idea of it in the film, because I believe it was a den for kind of Gotham's elite to indulge in things that they shouldn't be caught doing in public. And so that's also a perfect place for, you know, Falcone to collect dirt on all of Gotham's kind of high society figures. Now, in this piece showing Selina confronting Falcone, you can tell they hadn't quite landed on her final look yet. That's definitely Zoe Kravitz there, so that's, you know, she'd been cast at this point. But in the final film, she's wearing what looks like her Year One inspired outfit. I do remember Zoe mentioning in interviews, though, that the wig changing aspect of her character did come later in production. That was something that was her idea. So again, all this concept art was likely done before those details were locked in. We've then got these exterior shots this exterior shot of Falcone's penthouse, which in the film we never see from the outside, but in the concept art, you can see that it's actually perched right atop one of Gotham's major bridges there. I think that's a really beautifully thought out detail, even if we don't really get to see it in the film, but I like how this was thought out. They actually put some thought into where this would sit architecturally within Gotham's kind of layout, and it wasn't just kind of haphazardly put anywhere. This particular shot isn't in the film either, but I did pair it with Selina walking into Falcone's place. Not an exact match, but I feel like the layout is close enough, and that it's probably the reverse of this shot, because I think if you flip that shot around, you would get that view. So I liked pairing these two here together. I also like how the Iceberg Lounge is integrated into the base of the bridge's structure here. I believe it's referred to in the film as like the shoreline or something, like the area like that. So these shots visually lined up pretty well. This is from where the Riddler was kidnapping the DA. Now, next up, Batman's first entrance into the club. I love that they just had him walk straight in like he owns the place. That's really cool. And I think this concept art is reflecting that same scene, him kind of moving down that corridor into the main kind of dance floor area down the end there. Now, then you've got this big open interior space, which lines up perfectly. So this big long rectangular layout, and even the dancers on the pedestals there, you can see in the concept art, the film literally pulls those directly over, I think minus the elaborate kind of feather dancing kind of things they've got going on there. I really do like the way they changed the color palette for these scenes though. So in this concept art, it's more of like a moody kind of blue cool color, which does remind me a lot more of the Dark Knight's club fight scene. I really am glad that they shifted to these angrier colors, so like your reds and your yellows. I feel like it reflects kind of, you know, the brutality and like the heat and the violence of like this point where Batman is. He's kind of a man on a mission. He just waltzes in and just starts, you know, absolutely ragging on people. And then you've got this fight happening in this central elevated platform brawl here, which again looks like it's been translated pretty closely from this piece of concept art here. Then moving into the back corridors, so like of the Iceberg Lounge, we've got Penguin's areas. Now this shot with Selina walking down this narrow hallway towards him, and Batman here, and you know, with Penguin looking at them both, and the long glass walls, like that skinny corridor, there's no way this space was randomly imagined for concept art. It feels like the concept art was done either after the location was scouted or the set was built, because this is just way too precise. It's one of those moments where they clearly knew exactly the shot they wanted before they started working on the concept art. I couldn't find a perfect match-up shot for this kind of like makeup room concept art looking through the glass, but that's definitely how the room is laid out, and that's how it exists in the set. You can see it in some behind the scenes stuff, and when we flip the shot around, you can see, again, that is exactly what the set looks like. We just never get that exact perspective in the film. And then we've got the elevator fight, which takes place much later in the film. So Batman just hiding above and then dropping down on this guy. So in the concept art, it actually looks a little bit funny, a little bit goofy. You're just kind of watching him hang there. I much prefer how they played this in the final film, where they show it from the thug's point of view, letting us spot Batman basically right when he sees him, just a split second before he just kind of drops down. So I think that reveal is way more effective, because we as the audience don't know where Batman is, just like that guy doesn't. So it feels more effective in that reveal. Now finally, this last shot, this is an absolutely perfect matchup. The only difference is that the final version of this shot in the film takes place after the flood, so you can see all the water in the bottom of the Iceberg Lounge there. But the lighting of this scene, everything, just the way it's lit, the color of the lighting, everything is perfect. It's just literally the difference between it being flooded and not flooded. So you've got the DJ set up in the bottom there in the concept art. But yeah, a lot of cool stuff in the Iceberg Lounge here. Okay, so while Selina's apartment doesn't get a ton of screen time in the film, there's actually, enough concept art for it that I thought I'd give it its own little section. Now, first up, we get this great kind of side view of the building layout showing how her apartment kind of spans the length of this corner block. Now, I did pair this with the shot of Bruce watching her through the windows because it really shows you how well that final concept lines up. Or how that concept lines up with the final version that we get on film. And we only ever really see her apartment from the outside from Bruce's POV here. We don't really get any other look at it. Now, this next piece with Selina on her motorcycle and her cat by her side here, this doesn't line up. This doesn't line up with any shot from the film. It feels like a more stylistic piece than like a literal kind of shot list situation. So I've slotted this next to the moment just where she rolls out of her garage. The art feels kind of a little bit more like Blade Runner in tone. I think that's just because of the neon lighting and the haze. So it's definitely moodier than what we get on screen. But this next shot of Selina riding off while Bruce watches, this one lines up really well and is one of those moments where I think this shot was very set in stone and determined. The only difference is that in the final film, Bruce is immediately jumping on his own motorcycle and then following her rather than just kind of standing there watching her very nonchalantly. Now this next piece, with Bruce kind of watching her from across the street while she gets ready, we don't get this exact angle in the film, but this matches up with the scene. And I think it's clear that early on they may have considered shooting this scene more kind of traditionally, showing these kind of like environmental establishing shots, but then eventually they lent into the whole like Batman's POV. So I think this scene is supposed to mirror the Riddler's kind of stalking out of the mayor, and then we see Batman, watching Selina. Of course, they're very different kind of motives for why they're watching people, and that's a video for a whole different day, to be honest. There's lots of interesting parallels between the Riddler and Batman, but again, very, very different video. I'm getting very sidetracked here. Now, inside Selina's apartment, we get this great piece of concept art that lines up very closely with what's on screen. Big difference is probably the lighting. The concept art is a much cooler toned piece, whereas in the final film it's lit more by like the yellow street lights bleeding in from the outside. That's probably just a practical decision, to be honest. You're gonna have yellow street light kind of filtering into your apartment. It does make the space feel, more kind of gritty, grimy, rusty kind of Gotham feel. The overall concept art does make the place feel a little bit nicer, more well kept, slightly chic. But in the film, her apartment does feel kind of dirtier, grittier. It's been lived in. Of course, it had just been ransacked in the film. I didn't include, you've got a lot of cat lines, but you can see that in the art that they, and even in the film, that the cats are very present there. So again, I'm doing a lot of yapping for a location that doesn't have a lot of screen time. But yes, Selina's apartment, very cool concept art, lines up nicely. So starting off with the Penguin's interrogation scene, there's actually a handful of pieces from this particular scene showing it from a couple of different angles. There's not a ton to say on this because it is so faithful. The setup is exactly the same. Penguin's pinned against the wall there. The scene is lit only by the Batmobile's headlights. Batman doing the interrogating with Gordon nearby. But what I did find a little bit interesting as I was looking at this is how Gordon is staged in some of these early visuals. He seems to be standing kind of further back, a bit removed from the scene, almost letting Batman do his thing, potentially crossing a line while keeping his own hands clean. At least crossing a line that, the police technically shouldn't cross. In the final film, Gordon is much more involved, getting right up in Penguin's face himself. It feels more like Batman and Gordon are working as a team rather than Gordon just kind of being present while Batman does his thing. The environment changes a little bit between these pieces as well, like the pillars change structurally. So you've got these big, gigantic round pillars in this one scene, and then those more rectangular, thinner ones. So I think they may be testing out some different locations for this scene before locking one in. In this final shot here, or this final piece of concept art, the environment does match basically one for one again here. So at this point, I feel like they'd locked in a location and then they kept going with concept art. But Visually, I really like how the scene plays out. Lit by nothing except the Batman's headlights, I think that's a really cool choice. It's harsh, it's high contrast. That works really well translating from both the concept art straight into the live action version that we finally get in the film. Now, shifting into this scene in the morgue, again, really close match. We don't get a wide shot like this in the film. I genuinely thought we did when I was looking for footage for this, but I guess that was just a Mandela effect in my head, so we only get these much tighter shots. Now, the concept art, the lighting in the concept art is much cooler. It's a whiter, sterile, more clinical environment. It's still very grimy and dirty, but in the final film, I do prefer these kind of greeny yellow tones. It makes the place feel kind of, I want to say dirtier. I mean, the concept art here is quite dirty as well, but I don't know, more rotted, I guess. I mean, which kind of makes sense. The GCPD is probably hauling bodies through here a lot. Like, Gotham is a pretty violent city, so it feels very used. This place has had a lot of bodies pulled through it. So now this next scene, the confrontation between Batman and Gordon, I really, really like this concept art, but I also really like the changes that they make in the final film. In the art, it's happening in what feels like a relatively kind of calm GCPD corridor. Batman looks like he's been pulled aside by Gordon for a quick scolding, like, hey man, cool it, kind of situation. It feels like that's the vibe that this particular piece of concept art gets me. Gordon's still unhappy with Batman, but the stakes don't feel as high. In the film, the confrontation's happening inside this kind of holding area with 20 or 30 kind of angry cops just waiting for Batman to make the wrong move. Kind of everyone is on edge. And Gordon, in his moment of like where he pulls Batman and is like, dude, stop throwing your weight around here. We are trying to help you, or at least I am. And also, you know, Gordon can only protect Batman so much in this scene, as evidenced by later on. He's like, dude, we've got to get you out of here. So it feels like a really like as a point. This line is used in the film as well, but it feels like a powder keg in this scene specifically. So I think the change from this kind of hallway into this really tight enclosed space was a really, really smart decision. So now one of the bat signal scenes, this one's a cool comparison and I like this. So in the concept art, the rooftop space is way more packed with like construction clutter. You've got tools, scaffolding, debris. This looks like a fully active work site or something that would be a fully active work site during like a working day. In the final film though, it's pretty bare. It's very stripped back. You know, the building's half constructed, but it doesn't look like construction is still continuing on this building. It's like there's nothing there. I think this difference plays really beautifully into the whole renewal fund's corruption arc within the film. The top image here, or the concept art looks like a building that will be finished. It's in progress, it's being built. Whereas the final version of the film looks like the funding dried up, they pulled all their resources and just bailed, leaving the structure basically half done. That ties in so perfectly with the idea of Gotham's renewal project being just this hollow, empty shell for laundering money, which Falcone was using. So this is another change between the concept art and the final film that I think works really beautifully into kind of, it's where this visual storytelling really, really kicks in. And it's not just about making things look cool for coolness' sake, because this top piece of concept art looks good. You don't necessarily need to throw a ton of crap into your scene just to make it look good. I think, you know, stripping things back sometimes tells a much better narrative and it's better visual storytelling. Sometimes less is more. Batman and Selina share a lot of screen time in the film for obvious reasons, but that means we get some really beautiful concept art of the two of them together. This first piece of them together kind of speeding down the highway on their bikes, I've paired this up with them just after they met and they're leaving the mayor's mansion and heading back to Selina's apartment, but truthfully this could also fit with them leaving the cemetery together at the end. It could really go either way, but I just kind of like pairing it here with the two of them at the start a bit better. Next up, we've got Batman kind of peeking out from behind one of the memorial structures here at the cemetery. This is another one that matches up really, really closely, like down to the angle and the blocking of the characters within the scene as well. The film version leans to like the location being a little bit more kind of gothic and ornate with a few of these kind of like decorative pieces around the edges of the set. And I think putting this scene at dawn was a much better choice than having it take place at what looks like nighttime. I think, again, the early morning light fits Batman's shift in mindset at the end of the film with him wanting to become more of a hopeful figure in Gotham than just being this kind of angry, vengeful figure. Now this next piece didn't make it into the film, at least not in this current state, but it does show Batman clearly prepping Selina before she enters the Iceberg Lounge with those contact lenses in, and this is an absolutely gorgeous image. I really do wish we did get a version of this shot in the movie, because I believe this would have looked absolutely stunning in live action. But that said, I understand why they closed the space into this more kind of tight, closed off space, because it made the moment feel more intimate. And I think that's kind of the whole point of this scene, with the kind of tension between Batman and Selina. Like, is he just checking the lens, or, is there something going on there, kind of catching feelings for one another? I really like how they dirtied up the space though in the final film. It just feels, and it truthfully might even just be the lighting, where they're almost kind of silhouetted with the light kind of streaming in from behind them there. Just the lighting across the Batman overall is just absolutely freaking incredible. And it's sometimes hard to communicate lighting choices through concept art. But again, lighting is one of those things that just literally will make or break films. And you see it in a lot of films where like flat lighting usually looks, it will really make something look cheap. The Batman's lighting is anything but that. There is just so much sauce in these shots. Again, this is very clearly Zoe Kravitz in these pieces of concept art here. No wig at this point, which again I mentioned earlier kind of came about later in the production process as Zoe's idea. And there's some more of Batman's gear kind of scattered around here with his kind of surveillance tech and stuff. But yeah, really close visual matches with these pieces of concept art to what we get on screen. And finally, the kiss scene. This piece of concept art alone is just absolutely beautiful. I do like though that they kind of stripped it back a little bit visually in the film. Like they cleared out the skyline a little bit. And I know a lot of that is probably dependent on how they were, designing the 3D version of Gotham to kind of fit the space or the volume that they were filming on. And I think opening up the background just, keeps Batman and Selina more the focus of this shot. And, you've got all the glowy, dreamy sunset, sunrise. I can't remember what time of day this was taking place. But regardless, aside from them being, switched on either side, this is like a perfect matchup. Alright, next up we've got the scenes taking place at City Hall, and more specifically the mayor's funeral. Now straight off the bat, I couldn't find a perfect shot-for-shot matchup for the entrance to the church. I say church, sorry, I know it's technically Gotham City Hall, but the space really does have this kind of grand cathedral kind of energy to it, with these big high ceilings, the Gothic pillars, and like the light filtering in through the back. It's really, really beautiful architecture. And I don't think we ever get a really big, wide cinematic shot of this in the final film, but the concept art really absolutely nails this space. And I know this was a practical set that they built, not a scouted out location. So I think that means that, they could have had this concept art aligned more closely, obviously, because they obviously had a design brief for what this was supposed to look like. Next up, we have the DA crashing into the space with his collar bomb and everything. This shot only matches up for like a split second, but architecturally everything matches again, and this just supports what I'll get into later in the video. The idea that so much of this film's pre-production design was locked down so early, and that's why these visuals, right down to like the angle of the shot, all align so perfectly. But here's where things get a little bit kind of weird for me. There are two pieces of concept art that show Batman unmasked. This first one here shows him standing out the front of City Hall in what looks like the full bat suit, but yeah, no cowl. So I don't know what's going on here. But in this second one, you can actually see the SWAT team walking straight past him, seemingly unbothered, like they don't care. I have no idea where this would have slotted into the film, or even how this would have slotted into the film. Usually with, pieces of concept art that clearly didn't make a version of a scene in the film, I can kind of understand how, where, or why it would have fit, but this one is just genuinely baffling to me. I don't know how in the script this would have worked, to have him just kind of standing there in the full suit and no cowl. It's definitely one of the most out of place pieces of concept art I've come across. Could have been an early idea that got scrapped, who knows. If you've got any theories, please drop them down in the comments below, because this one has, got me kind of scratching my head quite a bit. Now, this next piece doesn't appear in the final film either, but man, it's one of those ones that I really, really wish it did. It's this kind of really beautiful overhead shot of Batman entering City Hall and then walking towards the DA at the front. The whole thing's lit with these red lights. These could have been flashing police lights, I'm not sure, in the final version of the film. It's very dark in there, as you can see, like this. I can understand why this particular version of this shot or this scene wouldn't have worked. Visually, this is incredibly stunning, and it would have been really cool to see, but I can kind of understand maybe why it wasn't. You do have that big, beautiful overhead shot at the end of the film with Batman. It's got the flare lit and he's leading the people out, and I'll come to that when I get to that sequence. But I think it's better to use shots like that sparingly, because I think they hit a lot harder if you know you're not overdoing it. So less is more. I really do like the idea of less is more, which is ironic, me talking about this in what is probably a really long YouTube video now about a 3-hour long film. So I do see the irony there. I just wanted to drop this quick little GCPD insert separate from the main kind of action sequence that's coming up, because there's a couple of pieces of concept art here that I think are tied to a cutscene. So there's a moment in the Batman script book where Gordon and the GCPD are examining the Riddler's first cipher, that drive riddle, the one that Bruce and Alfred solve quite early on. And while this scene isn't in the final cut, it was clearly filmed. We've got these two behind the scenes stills showing Gordon and some detectives studying what looks like the cipher projected up on the wall here. Now, based on those stills, these pieces of concept art line up really closely, and I'm fairly confident they were meant to match that deleted scene. I suspect this scene was cut purely for pacing because, as I just mentioned, the film is already 3 hours long. It's probably one of those scenes where the info is better delivered through Bruce and Alfred anyway. So still cool to see these behind the scenes glimpses of what almost made it into the final film. Alright, so kicking things off with this first piece here for Batman's flight suit sequence is definitely a more traditional take on Batman gliding through Gotham. You've got like a big wide shot, city lights, that classic cape silhouette. If you've seen the Batman though, you know that's not at all how it's filmed. Matt Reeves was very intentional in his choice here. He wanted to shoot it very tight, very close up, like a kind of GoPro, like the GoPro footage that you'd see from real life wingsuit gliders. I believe the idea was that he wanted to kind of put us as the audience in as much of Batman's shoes as he kind of could for this scene. And I think that, you know, these shots very much achieve that. And so these pieces of concept art are very hard to line up with shots in the film because they're all much more traditional Batman gliding shots. The fact that we don't see any like wingsuits in the concept images implies to me that the wingsuit idea came about much later after these designs are already done up. Now this next one, Batman rising up the staircase as he fires the grapple gun, this is probably one of my all-time favorite matchups of the whole bunch. The shape of the stairwell, the composition, the angles, I know it's technically a mirrored image, but it's one of those ones that's just like such a close one-for-one that it really feels worth highlighting. And another one of those sequences that was clearly very carefully thought out beforehand in order for this concept art to line up so closely with the final version that we do see on screen. Now him leaping off the clock tower here, again, there's no exact frame match for this, so I've just paired it with some other gliding concept art here as closely as I could. This whole sequence was a little bit tricky to line up with concept art, to be honest, because there is really nothing that lines up that closely. I really do like the art or the kind of design of his gliding kind of cape situation here. It looks like a little bit of a hybrid between a traditional cape and the wingsuit that we see. So I would love to see something closer to this in the sequel. And given how disastrous his landing was in the film, I feel like he definitely needs an upgrade. So a more traditional cape glider hybrid would be awesome. Alright, so next up we've got the Batmobile Chase, and while it's one of the most iconic sequences in the film, we actually only get 2 pieces of concept art from the chase itself. So to flesh this section out a little bit, I've included a few of the earlier shots in the lead up to the chase, starting with the recycling plant where Penguin and his kind of entourage pull up here. This one really caught my attention in my research because it was at this point when I was kind of looking at the concept art that I realized how closely some of these elements were matching up with the final film. So like, for example, like the geometry of this scene and this location, that long stretch down the side of the building, those three rectangular loading doors, even the glass paneling up the top, it's all basically a one-for-one recreation. It's those moments where I started going, okay, something is kind of fishy about the production cycle of the film. Not so much fishy, but more just interesting. Because again, as I keep mentioning, and I'm sorry to sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but concept art just so rarely lands this precisely. But next up here, we've got this shot, and it's kind of a subtle one, or not so much subtle, but it's more of, I'm just kind of interested as to why they chose to render this moment at all, because it feels like such a random beat to dedicate a full piece of concept art to, which is basically Batman looking in on the drug lab down below. That's not to, diminish the piece whatsoever. I'm really glad that I found this. I love the idea of Batman kind of just stalking out the scene from above, really. And so yeah, that was a really cool find. But now onto the actual Batmobile chase itself. This is one of the only pieces we have of the Batmobile actually, plowing down the street. I've paired it with the moment where he kind of smashes through the pipes, tumbling off the truck. It could also work with his nitros boost just before he jumps through the flames, but it was really just one of those moments where I could kind of pick anywhere in the chase and it would line up. So But now the highlight of the sequence, of course, is Batman bursting through the flames at the end there. This is one of those rare cases where the final shot in the film actually well surpasses the concept art. Now, this artwork already looks incredible, just the Batmobile barely scraping through all these kind of trucks crashing behind him. But the film really dials it up with the Batman like launching through the flames and that fireball. It was just such an incredible moment. And I really love that because in so many films, especially big budget superhero movies and things, you will often hear people say that a lot of the concept art looked cooler than what we got on screen. And I'm so happy to say that the Batman does not have this problem. Now we've got a couple of pieces of concept art focused on Bruce visiting Alfred in the hospital. Not a ton to say on these. These match up very closely with what we do see in the final film. One small thing I noticed though is that even in the concept art, the hospital has a kind of dirty, grimy feel to it, which is interesting because usually when you think of a hospital, you think of like sterile, spotless, and like kind of overly white. But I guess in Gotham, even that is not guaranteed. In the film itself, it does lean more into the hospital just being kind of in a low light kind of space. There's just not a lot of lights on. The space does feel cleaner overall and less kind of grungy than the concept art suggests. And I do think that works for the better because, Bruce is a literal billionaire. So after all, you'd expect Alfred would be getting the best possible care at the best possible hospital. I might just be reading into this a little too much because I've spent too long looking at all these kind of dirty, decaying Gotham environments. But yeah, just an interesting difference. Overall, these concept pieces line up really closely with the final version. All right, first up is the Riddler's apartment. Now, even here, it's clear they were going for that really chaotic, obsessive, kind of manic energy. I do like the fact that in the final film, though, it looks more kind of deranged. There's just more kind of stuff lying around. You've got all these kind of jerry-rigged little contraptions, and it feels really messy, and like this guy's an actual like full-blown psychopath. The concept art feels a little bit cleaner, almost like a little bit of an artist's studio kind of vibe. At least that's the vibe I'm kind of getting from it. So I do like them kind of, it's like a lot of things in these concept arts or in the comparisons that a lot of the final versions on film have really toned up a lot of the visual elements. Now this piece is really interesting. It's one of the only early pieces of concept art we had of the Riddler himself, and it's a very, let's just say very different look than what we got in the final film. Truthfully, this just kind of looks like your average Melbourne coffee shop here in Australia. But yeah, the Riddler's design here is something that, I just could not have ever really seen this working in the film. It's just it feels so tonally different to what we do end up getting on screen. I don't think this would have worked at all. It might actually, though, have been from when somebody else was cast in the role, because looking back at some of that Zoe Kravitz or Catwoman concept art, you can see that they've very clearly done that concept art with Zoe Kravitz in mind. So potentially they had someone else in mind to play the Riddler and they were looking at a different look. I can't really pick who this actor might have been. If anyone has any ideas on who that potentially looks like, please let me know down below. But yeah, I think it was a good choice to kind of transition to that Zodiac Killer-esque kind of vibe, because this just, I feel would be a little bit strange. Look, truthfully, Matt Reeves is an incredible writer and director, so if he wanted to make this look work, I'm sure he could have, but ultimately I'm very, very happy with the version that we did get in the film. All right, so now into the big finale. So straight away, we've got Batman bursting into the Gotham Square garden in this big spectacular entrance that was clearly very well thought out prior to everything, because this concept art lines up really, really closely. I really do like that they threw in kind of the fiery like yellows of like Batman's little explosions going off. They could have had him crash in without like these yellow blasts, but I think visually it just adds a lot more to the scene. It feels like there's a lot more kind of energy. And then once he does hit kind of the rafters here, it does dive into those darker blues, which the concept art leans more heavily into. And then the grapple guns into these Riddler goons' legs and that kind of spin move back. This lines up really closely. You can see all the goons kind of stacked up on the beams there, which leads into the whole fight scene of Batman kind of jumping around on the rafters here, taking them out one by one. I really like how closely this lines up. And now up to this big sacrifice moment where he cuts that electrical wire. I don't think Batman actually knew if he was going to survive here or not, just like quick little tangent. This is more of his big sacrifice moment where he's like, well, I've clearly inspired the wrong kind of vengeance in the city, so I need to try and do at least one thing that is, worthy of maybe redeeming myself, so to speak. So, and of course in the concept art, it's this big bright white light, which does exist, of course, in the film once he cuts the wire. But in the film, you can see these red and blue flashes in the background as, those police lights underneath him. That's just, I really like this. It's like kind of got a little more style to it. It's just a little bit more visually dynamic. And then this next one, I think, is a real fan favorite. shot. So as Batman is leading everyone out of the arena, the concept art here is like a wider angle. It's not so top down, and you can see a lot more of the environment. So I think it's probably just moonlight or like ambient light kind of filtering in. But the film goes really heavy with like just, it was pitch black, if not for that red flare, which just bathes everything in red, which I think was the best call. It's really like a clean, symbolic, really striking image. And then right after that, we go into this press conference with Bella Real addressing Gotham. This feels like a mirror to the start of the film where the commissioner gave that speech after the mayor's death. It's a nice kind of bookend, same kind of scene, but like with the new kind of tonal outlook that Batman has arrived at the end of the film there. In the concept art, they've actually got Gordon more on level with her, kind of standing right there next to her. But in this final cut, they've definitely, I think it was a good call to have Bella just be the focus. I mean, she's the new mayor, and she's kind of making this call to Gotham citizens to be like, you know what, we're going to do better. We're not going to let our city fall into this, this level of corruption again. Gordon probably doesn't want the spotlight anyway, and that dude looks exhausted. Now, this next piece of concept art, I almost missed this because I found this late in the Art of the Batman book. I'm so glad I did, because this really kind of captures the whole heart of the movie, which is Batman just kind of sharing this human moment with someone that's just, there's no words spoken, and it's just this quiet kind of thank you. And it's Batman's big realization that he needs to be more and represent something more hopeful for the people of the city than just vengeance. So I did pair this piece of concept art up with him carrying this woman out across the rooftop. Now, this last shot, which I did show at the start, and I know I've said this like 3 times, but this might actually be my favorite piece of concept art. This is just such a beautiful stylized visual, Batman hanging from this cable, kind of reaching down to pull someone out of the floodwaters. It doesn't make sense logically, and so I understand why this wouldn't have been translated directly into the film, because what's he hanging from? Is it a helicopter, the Batwing? How many people can he actually save this way? He can maybe pull out like one person at a time, and there's like 5 people climbing up there. Anyway, it wouldn't have worked logically regardless of how beautiful this image is. So I thought I would just pair this up with the kind of nice goodbye moment where that woman's being lifted up on the stretcher as Batman has kind of got her hand out to her. So yeah, very, very cool stuff here at the end. Now, finally, the last couple of pieces of concept art we get are from Arkham, right at the end of the film. So this first one here is just of the cells. This lines up really perfectly with the final shot. You've got that guard spot on the right, Riddler's cell over on the left, and then Joker's cell would be straight in front of us here. There's not much to say on this one. It's another kind of one of those perfect lineup ones, the geometry of the set, the placement of everything. It's like a storyboard that was turned into a piece of concept art and then just shot exactly as planned. Now, this next one that we get of the Joker, this is very, very cool, and it is the only piece of concept art that we have seen of Barry Keoghan's Joker. Now, I know he's a bit of a hot topic. People are still kind of split on the look, like whether they like it or not, and I'm still a little bit on the fence with it myself, to be honest. In the concept art, he does have that kind of grotesque vibe, but I'd say it's kind of a little bit more toned back. It's a little bit more measured. You do have the bloody teeth and that bloody smile. It's not quite as full on as what we got in that deleted scene. Personally, I think I'd prefer something a little closer to this design, because it still fits the tone of Reeves' world, but it's not quite so extreme. That smile in the deleted scene, it's a lot. It is a lot. But the concept here of just showing off like the sliver of his face with the glimpse of that grin framed by that light, that kind of, all those elements did make it into the final film, even though that 1, the design was changed, and 2, this is not a direct lineup as far as like shots go. That said, the deleted scene was deleted for a reason, so maybe they still haven't quite committed on a lot of the design elements of the Joker yet. So we'll just have to see where that one goes. Now, the next segment, just a heads up, I actually recorded all of this before doing, or I recorded this next segment before doing the voiceover, so there might be a little bit of info I've already touched on, or a few double ups. So if I sound like I also belong in Arkham, that's why.
Now, I mentioned at the start of the video that a lot of these concepts line up really, really closely with what we end up getting on film. And I think if you've watched this far, I'm sure you'd be able to kind of see what I mean by that. But why? Why do these line up so closely? Usually with concept art, there's a little bit of a disconnect between the actual art and what you get on screen. At least a lot of these big budget, like kind of superhero tentpole films, and in other films in general, the concept art will never usually line up this closely. But I think the reason for it in the Batman's case is the way that the pre-production was conducted on this film. Now, in a lot of the director commentary, Matt Reeves has talked about, and in other interviews as well, Matt Reeves has talked about how they actually used VR to plan the shoot, plan the sets, and James Chinlin, who is the main production designer on the Batman. He actually brought this into how he designed the sets. So before any of these sets were ever built, they were all designed in a VR kind of space that Matt Reeves and James could kind of put on a VR headset, walk around the space in, and kind of really get a feel for where they wanted to position the camera in the set, how the set was going to be built. If a certain part didn't work, they could then, you know, work together to collaboratively kind of change that and work with the set builders to be like, hey, we don't want this wall here anymore or whatever. And it basically let them plan everything out down to like the most minute detail before ever arriving on set. And I think that is the reason why a lot of this concept art looks almost identical to what we see in the film, because a lot of these shots were probably picked out in these virtual environments long before the sets were ever built. So Matt and Greg Fraser have obviously, you know, been in this virtual environment and been like, yep, that's the shot we want, that's the angle we want. The set is then built, but then while the set's being built, of course, James Chinlin and his team are doing the concept art from that exact point of view that Matt has chosen. And then that's how we end up with these pieces of concept art that look basically identical to the film. And the real kind of nail in the coffin of this theory for me was, as I was doing a lot of the research to kind of find all these different pieces of concept art, I came across these weird like 3D renders. They are what you would kind of refer to as an animatic. And if you're a Star Wars fan, of course, I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of these like deleted Star Wars scenes that like aren't rendered or anything. And it's really similar to what you're seeing in the Batman here, at least in these stills. I couldn't find any moving footage of this, but you get these kind of really goofy looking assets. Like, look at this funny looking Batman and the Riddler and all these like low polygon version. They're basically just assets that they use to fill out the scene. But this is that kind of VR environment that Matt Reeves was talking about, being able to walk through a scene. You can choose a lens, you can position and block your characters out where you would have them. And that's when I connected in my head after listening to the director commentary, and I'll put a snippet of it in here, when Matt talks about how all these sets were designed in VR. And I think that's really helped the film find its visual style and have everything be so like, every image is so rich, because I think every image was so thoroughly thought out long before they ever made it onto set. And that's usually not the case, especially in, like, let's take Marvel films for an example. I don't like to shit on Marvel films. I'm actually a big Marvel fan, but sometimes I've got to do it because it's easy to point out where they've done the wrong thing. They seem to be correcting a lot of that kind of those production mistakes now by shooting on real practical sets. But when you shoot an actor in a green screen environment and then you say to yourself, we'll figure out the greens, we'll figure out like the whole environment later. We'll just leave it up to a team of VFX artists to kind of sort it out later. The result, or the end result, can look cheap or not finished, or it just doesn't blend well because these things weren't properly thought out in advance. So, I mean, I'm incredibly happy that the Batman didn't take that route. And I think obviously going into the Batman 2, I assume Matt Reeves will use a similar approach, which leaves me confident that we're gonna have, you know, a similar, just absolutely stunningly, richly beautiful visual style for the Batman Part 2, because I can't imagine they would throw out this approach to the production that they had in Part 1. Matt in the director commentary talks about it very fondly, says it helped him out a lot. So I think Part 2 is going to be just as impressive visually, based on the fact that they will be taking in a lot of the experience from Part 1. And of course, when Part 2 comes out, I'll do more breakdowns on the concept art for Part 2 and everything. But I hope this has been an interesting video for you guys, and it's given you guys a little bit more of a kind of insight into, well, first of all, just the interesting breakdown comparing, you know, the concept art to what we finally got on screen. But yeah, more than that, I thought it was just an interesting little behind the scenes video for you guys about how they developed the visual style for the film. And anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know down below what you think, what you'd like to see more of from me, because, you know, I'll happily talk about Batman until the end of time. So yeah, anyway, I appreciate you guys for watching. If you've made it this far, please subscribe to the channel. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace out.